Assalamu alaikum students. I hope you all are well, safe and healthy at home. Well, dear students, welcome to all of you in this class of English language teaching, and I'm your course instructor Farzana Khan with another informative topic given feedback. Previously, you were taught about the lesson planning, how to plan lesson for teaching reading, writing, speaking and listening. So after planning lesson, definitely you will execute those plans. You will teach into the classroom, and while teaching, you will assign different tasks and different activities to your students which you have already designed in your lesson plan. So the question arises that how will you evaluate those tasks which you will assign to your students? How will you assess and how will you give feedback to your students so that your students must be able to improve and learn something? So this is what we are going to discuss. We are going to talk in today's class that how to give feedback to the students when you evaluate different tasks of the students. So first of all, I'll tell you about the feedback, that what is feedback, and then we will talk about the different approaches, that what different experts said about giving feedback to the students, and then how to give feedback to the students. This is what we will discuss one by one in today's class. So pay close attention to the lecture to understand that how to give feedback to the students. First of all, I'll tell you about the feedback. So what is feedback? In teaching, it is actually the information that is given to the learner about his or her performance of a learning task, usually with the objective of improving his or her performance. So feedback indicated what we were successful, that we were successful or unsuccessful in the task which we have done. So in teaching, it is actually the information which is given by the teacher to the learners on the performance of the learners. And the purpose of the feedback is always to improve the performance of the learners. So feedback have two components: assessment and corrections. When we talk about the assessment, the learner is simply informed how well or badly he or she has performed. This is called assessment. You have evaluated the task of the learners. When it comes to corrections, it is provided on aspects of the learner's performance through explanation or provision of better of their alternatives. So feedback have two components: assessment and correction. So if you are providing only assessment, you are just mentioning right or wrong. We can say you are assessing. And when you are going to make correction, you are providing explanation where the student has made mistake. This is called correction. And both these components, the combination of both these components can be called the feedback. Means you are evaluating, assessing the work of the learner, and then you are providing correction. You are telling to the students that how can he further improve himself or herself. So the question arises, are the two components of assessment and correction completely separable? Definitely no. So can you have assessment without correction or correction without assessment? Definitely no. Always we need to assess first and then we need to correct. And we cannot correct without assessment. And if we are only assessing the work and we are not making correction, then it means we are not giving proper feedback. Let me tell you about the different approaches to the nature and function of the feedback. We have one approach of audiolingualism, the other approach of humanistic methodologies, and the next is skill theory. So according to the audiolingualism, negative assessment is to be avoided as far as possible since it functions as punishment and may inhibit or discourage the learner. According to audiolingualism approach, we need to give the positive assessment. positive feedback to the students. So positive assessment provides a reinforcement of correct responses and promotes the learning. Negative assessment discourages the students for improvement. So we will also talk about that what is positive and what is negative feedback. Negative feedback is actually when you totally cross the work of the learner without mentioning that how can the further he improve. And positive feedback when you are explaining that how can he make further better. So humanistic methodologies. According to them, a crucial function of the giving of assessment is to preserve and promote a positive self-image of the learner as a person and language learner. Assessment therefore should be positive or non-judgmental. And the skill theory approach, according to them, for successful acquisition of a skill, the learner needs feedback on how well he or she is doing, hence the importance of the provision of constant and honest assessment. So, according to all approaches, the feedback should always be the positive. Whatever you are making corrections, you need to make in a positive way. Your purpose should always to encourage the learners so that they may not feel discouraged and negative feedback. So, the correction of mistakes. There are also different opinions about the experts belonging to different approaches that how to make correction of the mistakes, because mistakes are committed by the learners. It's a common point, but how to make correction so that the positive feedback should be provided to the students. So according to audiolingualism, learner mistakes are in principle avoided by the limiting of progress to very small controlled steps. Hence, there should be little need for correction. According to them, there is little need for correction because mistakes are committed by the learners. But there should be some controlled steps so that learners may not be discouraged. So, according to cognitive code learning, mistakes are regrettable, but an unavoidable part of learning. They should be corrected whenever they occur to prevent them occurring again. So, the purpose of giving feedback is that you need to make correction of the mistakes so that they may not occur again. According to interlanguage, mistakes are not regrettable, but an integral and important part of language learning. Correcting them is a way of bringing the learner's interlanguage closer to the target language. According to them, mistakes are not regrettable, but we can say the mistakes are important part of learning, the learning language. But what should be the purpose? The purpose should be to make correction in a way so that the learner should improve themselves and their interlanguage must be going closer to the target language. So, we can summarize all these approaches that the mistakes cannot be ignored. All those who are learning, they will definitely make mistakes. So, your purpose is to make correction in a positive manner. So, according to the communicative approach, not all mistakes need to be corrected. The main aim of language learning is to receive and convey meaningful messages, and correction should be focused on mistakes that interfere with this aim, not on inaccuracies of usage. According to them, there is no need to make correction of all the mistakes. The focus should be given on developing and improving the language, and those mistakes should be corrected which are hindering the aim. While monitor theory, according to them, correction does not contribute to real acquisition of the language, but only to the learner's conscious monitoring of speech or writing. Hence, the main activity of the teacher should be to provide comprehensible input from which the learner can acquire language, not to correct. The purpose, according to them, the purpose of the teacher is not to make correction. The purpose of the teacher is to provide comprehensible material, the comprehensible practice to the students, so that their focus should be on developing rather than making corrections. So these all are the approaches, different points about making correction and how to give feedback. So let me tell you further about assessment. So most of the feedback we give our learners is ongoing correction and assessment, directed at specific groups of learners, produced language with the aim of bringing about improvement. The type of evaluation involved here is sometimes called formative, since its main purpose is to form. As I already told you that feedback has two components, assessment and correction. So we do assess to make correction, and this is actually the feedback which we want to provide to the learner for their improvement. So distinct from this is the evaluation usually termed summative, where the teacher evaluates an overall aspects of the learner's knowledge in order to summarize the situation. So assessment is actually that the teacher tries to understand how much the students have improved and how can further efforts made by the teacher to bring improvement in the student. So after assessment, correction is also very important, so that students may not repeat those mistakes in their further tasks. Well, there are different types of assessment. The teacher's assessment. The teacher gives a subjective estimate of the learner's overall performance on the basis of written, spoken, listening, or reading tasks. So continuous assessment. It's very important for the improvement and development of the students. The final grade is some kind of combination of the grades the learner received for various assignments during the course. It is the result of the continuous assessment. Next is self-assessment. The learners themselves evaluate their own performance using clear criteria and weighting systems agreed on beforehand. It is the assessment which is done by the learners himself herself. The fourth is portfolio. The learner gathers a collection of assignments and projects done over a long period into a file, and this portfolio provides the basis for evaluation to the teacher and also for self-evaluation or self-assessment for the learner. Criteria. So when we go for assessment, at that time it's very important to set the criteria. What is the criteria on the basis of which the teacher is going to evaluate or teacher is going to assess the learner? So criterion referenced. It is how well the learner is performing relative to a fixed criterion, where this is based on an estimation of what it is reasonable or desirable to demand from learners at the relevant point in their development. It can be the criteria of age, career, level, stage of a course. So a criteria can be set, and on that criteria the teacher can evaluate. So norm referenced, how well the learner is performing relative to the group. This is called norm reference criteria. In this case, a group of slow learners would be assessed according to different easier norms than a group of faster ones. Well, you can evaluate the students. Definitely with the passage of the time, the teacher can assess the students that who are the fast learners, who are the slow learners. And when it comes to the assessment, then criteria we cannot judge, we cannot evaluate, assess the slow learner and the faster learner at the same level. We will evaluate the slow learner while comparing it with other slow learners and fast learners with the fast ones. So individual referenced, how well the learner is performing relative to his or her own previous performance or relative to an estimate of his or her individual ability. This is called individual reference criteria, which is set by the teacher to evaluate and assess the learner. Well, how to correct mistakes in oral work? On the whole, we give feedback on oral work, though speech on written work, and we go for writing. And although there are occasional situations where we might do it the other way round, for example, we discuss an essay with a student in a one tutorial, or write a letter providing a feedback on speech. So there are different ways. Sometimes when the students present in front of the teacher can give the oral feedback. Sometimes the teacher can type and after that can give the written feedback to the students. So there are some situations where we might prefer not to correct our learners' mistakes. In fluency work, for example, when the learner is in the mid-speech and correct word disturb and discourage more that help. So correcting mistakes in oral work, you need to keep this point in your mind when you have assigned the oral task to the students and the student is presenting in front of you in the oral form. At that time, you need to note down the mistakes of the students. At that time, you won't make correction in the middle of the speech because it will hinder the fluency of the speaker, of the learner. So during the oral task, you will just evaluate, you will just listen to the learner and you can point out, you can note down the mistakes and after that you can provide the feedback to the students. You can make correction at the end of the speech of learners. So what are the techniques of oral correction? Oral corrections are usually provided directly by the teacher, but they may also be elicited from the learner who made the mistake in the first place or by another member of his class. So corrections may or may not include a clarification of why the mistake was made or may not require the reproduction of the acceptable form by the learner. So by the end of the speech, the teacher can explain in front of the reader, in front of the speaker, face to face, that where he had made mistake. So the teacher should not ask the students for clarification why he made mistake. Here the mode should be positive within an encouraging mode. The teacher should encourage the students that how can he further improve and which were the mistakes and how can he further improve those mistakes. This is called the proper positive feedback, or we can say make a correction in oral task. So next is written feedback. Learners' written works include not only written compositions, also assignments on grammar or vocabulary, answer to comprehensive questions, tests, and so on. How can this feedback be made optimally effective? In written feedback, it is recommended that you need to make correction where the students has made mistakes. You need to correct the mistakes in a positive manner. You can mention the comments in a positive way to the students that how can they further improve. Just crossing with the red pen, we cannot say it's a positive feedback. You cannot improve the learner just crossing the paper, just crossing the assignments. Here you need to tell to your learners that which mistakes they have made and you need to tell the correct version to the students for their improvement in written form. This is called the written positive feedback, which is very important for the improvement of the learners. Well, question arises, what teacher action is conducive to a disciplined classroom? When you are teaching, when you are giving positive feedback, it's very important that your attitude should be positive towards the students. Some teachers have a kind of natural authority, and which is not very helpful to the rest of us. What may be helpful is a study of the kind of teacher behavior that are likely to produce a state of discipline in the classroom. So the teacher's choice of an appropriate methodology, for example, is likely to ensure that students feel they are learning in a way that is right and useful for them, and they will therefore be more willing to cooperate. So teachers plays very important role in the classroom. His behavior, his attitude, his selection of methodology is very important. So being a teacher, when you are going to teach to your students, you need to be very careful about your behavior towards teaching and towards the selection of the material, at the same time towards the selection of the methodology, which should be pretty clear for your students, because when the things are clear, at that time you can get positive response from the students, and definitely students will make less mistakes. So here are some practical hints for the teachers on classroom discipline. Being a teacher, you need to start your class by being firm with students. You can relax later. Get silence before you start speaking to the class. Know and use the students' names. Prepare lessons thoroughly and structure them firmly. And be mobile. Walk around the class just to tell students that you are observing them while teaching. You need to start class with a bang and sustain interest and curiosity. Means you need to start your lecture with a question. It can arise the interest of the students. You need to speak clearly for understanding of the students and make sure your instructions are pretty clear for your students. You have extra material prepared to cope with the slower or faster working. Means when you are planning a lesson, at that time something extra must be prepared. That if you are very fast and you have completed the topic, so to fill the gap of the time, you need to use that particular material which you have already prepared. And if you are teaching slowly, then you need how to wind up the complete lecture in a class. You need to already plan all these points. So look at the class when speaking and learn how to scan the students and make work appropriate, keeping in mind the age, ability, culture and background of the students. This is very important when you are going to teach to your students in the classrooms. While teaching, you need to develop an effective questioning technique. You need to ask questions during the lesson so that students pay close attention to the lectures. So you need to develop the art of timing the lesson to fill the available period. And vary your teaching techniques. Same technique can make the little students very bored. So avoid the boring techniques time and again. Go for the different techniques every time. Anticipate discipline problems and act quickly. Avoid confrontations within the classrooms. Means any type of confront within the class. Clarify fixed rules and standards and be consistent in applying them. When you have defined the rules regarding the discipline into the classroom, you need to be very strict about those rules. It will be very helpful in maintaining the proper discipline in your classrooms. Well, you need to show yourself as a supporter and helper to the students. Don't patronize students. Treat them with respect. Don't show your authority. Teach them in a friendly environment, but telling them that you are their teacher. You can use humor, constructive humor into the classroom. Choose topics and tasks that will activate the students, which must relate to the particular topic which you are teaching into the classroom, and be warm and friendly to the students. These are the hints which you can use while maintaining the proper discipline into the classroom. And well, dear students, in today's class we have discussed actually about the feedback, that how to give feedback. Feedback should be positive. You need to assess the work with deep intention and with clear focus, and after that you need to make corrections. You need to provide positive feedback to the students, because the purpose of the teacher is always to improve the learner, is to encourage the learners, not to discourage them. Well, here I'll wind up the session. In case of any confusion, you can post your question in the WhatsApp group and in the discussion classroom. Well, in the next class I'll come up with another topic. Here I'll wind up the session. Take care.